Hello, my name is Joshua Keith, and this is theburningcoal.com, a website dedicated to God's glory, His grace, and our response to it. Today we're going to be continuing looking at the Psalms, and if you'll remember, we try to look at the Psalms about once a month, and the idea is to get perspective of life from the Psalms. I think the Psalms are very valuable for this because they are called the heart of the Bible. And so a lot of times when we want to think about what our feelings should be, how do our feelings align with that of God? What is it that God expects us to think and to know and again to feel? We're able to see that from the Psalms. At the same time, the Psalms are not just about emotions, irrespective of God's word and God's law. What they try to do is they try to actually shape our feelings to go along with that. And we see that in particular in some of the wisdom psalms. And I think Psalm 19 is a very good example of the combination of those two things. I think we're going to see a lot of good and powerful imagery, but we're also going to learn about how our feelings line up with God's word and what it is that we should be focusing on, what should be our delight, what it is that we should have as our priorities. And so to start with, we're going to take a look at Psalm 1, and really, David here, he's going to start out with some meditations about the world around him. The heavens declare the glory of God, and the sky above proclaims his handiwork. Day to day pours out speech, and night to night reveals knowledge. There is no speech, nor are there words whose voice is not heard. We see here David talk about what some people call the idea of general revelation. And what that means is that God has actually revealed himself to us through his creation. There are things that we're able to learn about God when we look at what it is that he built. And so the heavens, when we look up at the heavens and we see their massive size, we see the stars above, when we see that wide expanse, that tells us that there's more out there. When we see the sun and the moon and the stars, and we see their bright lights, we see the power and the glory of God. And what David points out is that really this knowledge about God, there's no place that it can't be heard. In fact, you have to turn away from it to not hear what God is telling you. We see in his creation that he is all powerful. We see how mighty he is because the creation that we live in, this world, there's a lot of might and power in it. There are things that we cannot control when it comes to weather, when it comes to earthquakes, when it comes to all of these different things, and yet God is above it all. We see that God is everywhere and above everything when we see the massive expanse. And we also see the intelligence of God, how he designs and plans things out by the way that we see his creation and how it all works together and what God has done to bless man as the one with dominion over the world. How God has blessed us by his creation and the plan that he has put in place. I think oftentimes even just about the idea of the plants that he has given us and the wisdom that is shown in that the oxygen that we need is provided by plants, the carbon dioxide that plants need is provided by us, and God shows his great wisdom by having us work together to create this system that is able to maintain itself. And so we see God's glory whenever we look out at the world, and we see about his attributes and understand about him. And again, this is meant for the whole world to see. This is exactly what David said when he talks about the sun. He says, their voice goes out through all the earth, and their words to the end of the world. In them he has set a tent for the sun, which comes out like a bridegroom leaving his chamber, and like a strong man runs its course with joy. Its rising is from the end of the heavens, and its circuit to the end of them, and there is nothing hidden from its heat. Again, we see the glory of God in the sun, and in the way that it consistently is a part of every single day. You can set your time to it, and in fact, we do. We understand the glory of God being shown in His creation. It's amazing to me that there are so many people who look at the creation and doubt that there is a God. And you see a lot of arrogance in society today when they look back at the idols that were worshipped back in New Testament times and Old Testament times. And in some ways I understand that, because you see that the prophets mock the idols too, that they would take a tree and part of it would become their god and part of it would become the fire that they burned. But I also think that those people were able to see this general revelation of God. And I think they would mock anyone who would say that there is nothing out there other than just the universe itself, that there's nothing but space and other planets and these this unknowable thing, that it was just there and one day it's going to disappear and there's nothing behind it. They are ignoring the power that is shown in God's general revelation. They are ignoring the intelligence that's shown in God's creation. And so this is why Paul, in the book of Romans and in chapter 1, talks about his invisible attributes are seen throughout the creation. God expects us to know that He is there because of what has been created. And so David, in this Psalm 19, he makes the point that really our minds should always be brought back to God because we are constantly in His creation. And so when we get into the end of this psalm, he's going to talk about the meditations of our heart. But the meditations of our heart should be focused on the things that we see around us. And that should point us to follow God, to know that there is something greater than us, that He created us and that He wants something for us, and not to waste that. But unfortunately, a lot of times we spend our time distracting ourselves from meditating about God's creation, from looking at the great thing that He has built for our benefit, that He has given us dominion over, and instead to just ignore it all and to think about our pleasures, our desires, our entertainment. That's a mistake. God has this creation to remind us that He is there and that we should serve Him. Now, when you look out at creation, we understand that God is there. We understand that we should try to serve Him. But we may not know what that serving Him is like. And that's where I think some of the ideas of the idol worship came from, is that people knew there was a God and they decided that they were going to tell the story of what that God would be like. Now, I think there's other things to it than that's an overly simplistic view. But God does not leave us guessing as to how it is that we can follow Him, how it is that we can be pleasing to Him as our Creator. Instead, He gives us very specific revelation. And David, in particular, as a member of the Israelite nation, was incredibly thankful because they had the written law. And so notice what David says about this. He says, "The law of the Lord is perfect, reviving the soul. The testimony of the Lord is sure, making wise the simple. The precepts of the Lord are right, rejoicing the heart. The commandments of the Lord is pure, enlightening the eyes. The fear of the Lord is clean, enduring forever. The rules of the Lord are true and righteous altogether." So looking out at the universe and meditating on the stars, it tells us that there's something we should follow, but not necessarily what that following looks like and what it is that we're supposed to do. But praise be to God, and that's exactly what David's doing here. Praise be to God that he did not leave us to guess, but instead has been explicitly clear about what he wants us to do. And in fact, as the Creator, he is giving us the instruction manual of what we were designed to be and how we were designed to live. And so that's why the law of the Lord is perfect. That's why it's sure. The precepts of the Lord are right. They're pure, clean, true, and righteous altogether. We notice when you look in the Psalms the idea of parallelism. And a lot of times as parallels grow, you get two parallels and then you get a third one. And what that does is that shows exactly the amount of emphasis that the psalmist wants us to pay attention to. Well, that's when we're looking at 2, maybe 3 or 4 parallels to each other. But David here uses parallel after parallel after parallel. God gave us his word so we would know what to do. And the sad part of it is that so many of us spend our life ignoring that very word. We don't spend our time meditating on it, learning how to revive the soul, how we can become wise, how our hearts can rejoice, how our eyes can be enlightened, how we can endure forever, and how we can become righteous altogether. We don't focus on that. Again, we get distracted just as the same way as we get distracted from God's nature, we get distracted from the law of the Lord, his explicit commands and teachings that he gave us so that we would know what to do. We need to understand that God gave us this so that we may enjoy it. It's not even about salvation and being able to go to heaven, although that comes into play, no doubt about it. But understand that God gave this to us so that we could be what we were meant to be. And so that's why David goes in and says, more to be desired are they than gold, even much fine gold, sweeter also than honey and drippings of the honeycomb. Notice what David is trying to get us to see. There's a lot of people who go after money. And in fact, even those of us who are not necessarily choosing to serve mammon, as Jesus would put it in Matthew chapter 6, we spend a lot of time in our life gaining money so that we can meet our needs. And that is good, that is appropriate. But what David wants us to understand is it's more important than money, and not just a little bit of money, but than gold, much fine gold, the best gold that you could find, the most valuable gold that you could find. God's laws are better than that. They're sweeter than the honey and drippings of the honeycomb. They are sweeter to the taste. Sometimes I think this is difficult for us to understand because the laws of the Lord do ask a lot from us. They ask us to change who we are. They ask us to be righteous and holy altogether. But when we come and we follow God's word, when we live according to that, it is so sweet to live as we were designed to live. And even looking at David's own life, when David's focus was on God and that was his primary concern, it was a wonderful thing. But when he took his eyes off of that and focused instead on pride or power or money or the lust of the flesh, it ended in disaster and heartache. Not just spiritual disaster, but physical disaster, heartache, damage to his family. The law of the Lord is sweet because we live as we were meant to live. He says, moreover them, by them is your servant warned. In keeping them there is great reward. Who can discern his errors? Declare me innocent from hidden faults. He talks here again about this idea of being warned, to know what to do. We spend a lot of our time worrying about the decisions that we need to make, trying to decide the right path. And what David is telling us is, if you want to know the decisions that you should make, go to God's Word. Meditate on it. And if you want to see what's wrong with your life, if you want to see where things are not right, look at His Word. Find your hidden faults so that you can remove them and be innocent from them. Going even further, he says, keep back your servant also from presumptuous sins. Let them not have dominion over me. Then I shall be blameless and innocent of great transgressions. Again, let me follow your commands. Don't let me presume that I know what is best, that I know how things should be. Again, when we look at God's creation and we look at how small we are in comparison to that, there is no doubt that God has the right and the wisdom to tell us how to live. And so it is presumptuous to say, you know what, I know this is what you said, Lord, but I'm going to do it anyway. Don't let it have that dominion over you. That way you can be blameless and innocent of transgression because you submitted to the laws of the Lord. And then he follows it up. Let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, my rock and my redeemer. When we're looking at being obedient to God and following Him, we're looking at our thoughts and our words as well as our actions. And we need to be focused on being pleasing to God. We need to meditate on what that means to be pleasing to God. And again, how do we know? What is it that I should be thinking about? Where should my focus be in my life? Where should my priorities be? What should I be spending my time doing? What are the things I should be saying? What things should I avoid saying? How do I know? The law of the Lord is what tells us. And so we go to the Lord, who is our rock. He is our Redeemer, because He is stronger than us, He knows more than us, and He will deliver us. And so we can see from David in this psalm the importance of thinking about God, thinking about what God teaches us both in everyday nature and learning to appreciate God's creation and what He did on our behalf and the power within, what He has taught us through His creation. Another psalm talks about, what is man that you have placed him in this position of such great dominion? Even God's love is shown in His creation. But then you can go so much deeper because He has told us the thoughts of His mind. And so we can learn about God through His law, through His teachings, through His commandments. So let us strive to continually focus our meditations to be acceptable in His sight. I hope that this lesson has helped you in your walk in His kingdom.